All right, so today's topic is the role of masculinity and femininity for the conscious person today. That's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. Wait, we're filming. Fuck. This is the real one.
This is the real one. But we'll just cut in when it makes sense.
So we don't have to start it like when you just said this.
No, no, no. No, we can edit.
Okay. I feel like it was we're all like we're going with some stuff before, and now it's like now we're gonna
Yeah, we're tuning in.
tuning in, checking in. Okay, so masculine and feminine energy in the
Right,
conscious person.
right. What's the role of masculine and feminine energy and behavior and roles and all that for the conscious person of today?
You know what? This is a pretty exciting topic, really. It's like,
Yeah,
how often does this get talked about that, like, um, this masculine, feminine part of ourselves? And, like, I don't know, I feel like it's changed a lot in the last, since I was growing up. I'm not sure if it's culturally different or if it's just like different in today's day and age. What's your thoughts? Like, what do you know, we off camera, you talked earlier about this with um, when you were growing up, like the stuff that I was saying before, you were just like, you'd get bullied about or get teased about.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the culture in Denmark has changed a lot, and especially especially among young people, it's very young people are very intersexual. Like men and boys and girls who are like 18, 20, whatever. They're very intersexual. They're wearing the boys may wear makeup or they wear may have different types of earrings, whatever. And it's a lot more accepted to be blending femininity and masculinity on the sort of external like appearance level. And in terms of when I worked as a college teacher for a while, I also saw the the students of that age. They were exhibiting much more fluid gender roles, and the boys weren't like hard on each other and unemotional, and the women weren't like very sweet and consensus seeking, and sort of there was no real gender roles that stood out to me as a teacher as I observed the student. They were very much there were a few things here and there, but they didn't seem to have a very big consciousness of, oh, I am a boy and I'm doing this. That sort of gender consciousness was not really present in them. They related more to each other and to themselves as people, which is what I'm always trying to get people to do, is to try to see themselves as a person before a gender. Because
Hmm. Maybe like somewhere we could kind of just like go into right now is like this with if you break it down, like what is masculine energy, what is feminine energy. As a human being, we have
right,
both, right? But at the same time, it's very normal to kind of take on what we observe growing up, maybe from our parents, maybe from the school, maybe friends, or work places and things like that. So let's just like kind of break it down for a second? Just what does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? Can
I
you
think
tell
it's
me?
I think it's extremely difficult to define. Whenever I try to talk to people about masculinity and femininity, I'm always trying. I'm always trying to. I always say sort of generalistic or vague things because I think there are things in this universe that you cannot look directly at and observe. There are things that are sort of slippery and they change shape when you look at them. And I think femininity and masculinity is one of those things. You can sort of intuit it, you can feel it, and it's very
Hmm.
easy to talk about it when it's out of balance. If someone is too masculine, it's very easy to talk about. If someone is too feminine, it's very easy to talk about. But
Okay,
to
so
like,
what about like what are the signs of being out of balance with
right? Well,
masculinity or femininity?
as I like, this is a very like, sort of caricature way of looking at it, but I look at it. In Danish, we have something called a coordinate system, which is like you have this square, and then you have like four areas, and then you can plug in different points to where they belong in the system of ideas. And so I would rate I would rate everything. I would rate it into uh, positive masculinity and negative masculinity, and positive femininity and negative femininity. So I would put all traits into a positive or negative version of feminine or masculine. So, and often they actually, and often when a when a trait becomes too extreme, it often turns into the negative opposite polarity. So, to make an example, if
Can
you
can
have
I
a
just
met, yeah,
can I just butt in and say this is the first time I'm hearing about this
okay,
positive, negative femininity, positive, negative masculinity. So maybe
okay.
for the people also listening who are a lot like me, just like kind of like what is this thing? Could you just break that down? Explain some different traits of positive and negative of either like masculine, feminine.
Right. So if we start with the feminine, so often a negative trait is a positive trait taken to the extreme. So, for example, a positive feminine trait is the ability to just be and not do anything. Right. The ability to be happy doing nothing, to find peace with what is, and to be able to not have to always be acting. That's a positive feminine trait, and that's why the masculine is attracted to the feminine, because the feminine just seems to be sort of happy by itself, and that attracts the masculine, which is always going somewhere and doing something. Masculine is very much associated with action, and femininity is to some degree associated with passiveness.
Hmm.
So a positive feminist, a positive feminine trait is the ability to not need to change things to be happy. Whereas a negative feminine trait is not being able to change things that should be changed because they're creating problems. So a positive feminine trait is acceptance, and a negative feminine trait is resignation or helplessness, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if we look at the
Yeah.
masculine opposite, then a positive masculine trait is the ability to take actions and to correct your problems. And the negative masculine trait is to think that you are only here on Earth to do things and fix problems. Right. That's something that many men fall into, and many women are um, frustrated with when it comes to men. That they're always trying to fix problems. They're always trying to do things. They're always doing something, right? So if you
I
only see yourself as a problem fixing machine, that's a negative masculine trait. But if you
I've got
take actions, that's a positive one.
I've got to be honest. I can fall into all those traits, right? And but I definitely noticed in my relationship, in my marriage, that I tend to fall into this negative masculine trait of like Mister Fix It. You know,
Right, right,
there's something going
exactly.
on, or there's something like not right in this situation or whatever, and I put that hat on of like trying to fix it, or like always fixing the thing, and I met with much resistance, you could say.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing that you're bringing up here, and something that I'm very sure a lot of people in relationships experience this, when like the man or the masculine, like the
Mm.
man, but like just say the guy in the relationship is kind of pushing to fix that thing or find a
Right.
solution or resolve that thing, and the girl just wants to be like listened to, or she just wants to be kind of heard or kind of seen, I guess you could say, or
And
acknowledged maybe.
as you
Yeah.
reminded me of camera, we are in the times of the LGBTQ. So when we say masculine or feminine, we're really talking about the person who inhabits that energy. It can be a man, it can be a woman, it can be a heterosexual relationship, it can be a gay relationship. It can be, people can identify in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
someone will always at different times inhabit different energies, and it's the energies we're talking about. It doesn't have to be a man and woman, but
Mm.
because the man and woman usually exemplifies uh, those
One energy.
traits, right, in literature and in movies and such, we'll fall into saying man and woman, but what we really mean is feminine and masculine energy, whoever is embodying them. And I
Yeah.
think one thing that I always think of, which was such a perfect demonstration of this, is in Denmark we had for many years we had this knowledge, and I think it was all over the West, where women had been saying for a long time, like, we want to be listened to, we don't want you to fix our problems. So that kind of idea, men universally sort of grasped that. Finally they understood better that, okay, well, I have to listen, I don't have to fix your problems. But then actually we overcorrected, because then what a lot of women ended up doing was they kept venting about the same problems over and over, and then they didn't fix their problems. And then the man would go crazy because he wanted to listen to her because she wanted to vent her problems, but then because she didn't have the necessary masculine trait to actually fix her problems, she'd end up complaining about the same thing for years, and that's not what it was about. So many women actually, or people with the feminine energy, ended up using it as an excuse to not fix their problems by saying they wanted to vent about it. But that too is not healthy. When you're venting, what you're really doing is clearing out your negative emotions so that you can see clearly again, and so that you can find out what it is you need to do. Or if you already know what to do, then you clear your emotions just to purify your energy so that you can act from a place of clarity, and you can take positive action. It's no one's job in a relationship to listen to someone complaining who does not fix their problems. And at the same time, if you cannot listen to someone venting without wanting to fix their problems, then you're not giving them space to be. And that sort of ties into what my opinion is on all this, because this actually requires both people to both um, have the feminine ability to allow the person to vent and the masculine ability to take action and correct their problems. So I believe for the conscious person today that we should have a balance of masculine and feminine traits. I don't believe we should be extreme versions
One or the other.
of one or the other, and sort of overcompensate for each other. What
Yeah.
do you think about that?
Oh, where do I start?
Because I make a lot of people angry when I say, like, men and women are gone. There's no such thing anymore. So
That's a whole nother discussion right there. That's
it's
but
I
can
would say it's the same discussion, but yeah.
it's the same discussion, but like when you were saying those things, actually, what kind of resonated or came up for me, right, was actually this, whether like when I'm like being a therapist and people coming to see me, and the role, the different roles that I'm playing in that same space,
Right.
and this with
Exactly.
like people people come to kind of like they do come to because they have a problem that they've been that's like kept coming up over and over again, right? And they haven't been able to solve that, or they don't know where to go, right? So they come to the therapy and they unload a lot of their shit or like a lot of their emotional stuff. And
Right.
so one part of me is like really, this feminine energy of like listening, of like being very soft and very kind of empathetic and very much like seeing the person without fixing anything to begin with. You could
Right.
say, right? To just really just hear, just like truly listening to that person and then being heard. And then there's this other part of like the masculine, you could say, of like, okay, there's a certain point where it's like if we keep being faced by the same problem,
Right.
it's not only fixing it, but also just like taking some action of some sort. So there's, I just noticed that it's very clear in the sessions that I do, like shifting
Right.
between both. And I mean, we do that in like also just in day to day situations, but it's just very clear for me when you're talking about these things that that's like I'm consciously shifting between those two
Right.
when I'm in a session. So um, yeah, super interesting and like yeah. I want to go really, really deep into something else, but I'm like, I also want to give you some time. What's your kind of take on
The
that?
the therapist has to both be mother and father, right? As is necessary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's how you conceive of a new life, a new person.
And I got to say, sometimes when you just said that, what came to me was like sometimes when I'm like some people come back time and time again, and then at some point something shifts so much so that like they might come into the space and it actually looks like they're a different person. It's hard to say. It's hard to like kind of not like physically like different, but like there's something very changed about them, and it's
Yeah.
like yeah. So when you said that, I was just like, yeah, that actually is super clear in with some people that like there is such a big shift that happens that
Mm.
now I'm just going into this thing other thing, but you know before you mentioned something Tobian about this, like there's no such or like no not no such thing, but in today's day and age, today's where we're at, modern age or whatever, 2023, there's no such thing as uh, men and women energy or whatever. Well, what did you say there? You said something else actually.
Yeah, I said that there's no men or women anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. It's not a thing. It was never a thing. But now people are really starting to realize it, and we see a lot of kickback from that. And it's funny because the old patriarchal gender roles, they're angry because they want to maintain the old gender roles, but the new especially feminists, they also the feminists also they have new gender roles, and they're wrong as well. Like the new feminists want women to be in a certain new way, and it's like, no, that's also wrong, because no person should be in any certain way. Every person should be an individual taking their guiding path from the inside. So
Wait, so
there's just a lot of, yeah.
you're trying to say that like can you like I'm trying to like sing this in. So I'm a man, right? Like
Yeah.
that's like well, like that's the gender I've associated with all
Yeah,
my
I
life. But
I
you,
never I never look at you and think that you're a man. I never see you that way.
how do you see me?
I see you sometimes I see you as a child because you have a wonderful happy inner child that comes out now and then. But most of the time I see you as a person or a soul. I see you as this a living, oscillating, vacillating thing that is alive, and energy comes out and there is spontaneous action and thinking, all kinds of stuff going around. But I never think that you're a man.
Okay,
That just makes no sense to me.
so you're trying to say that I'm like an individual more than like
Right.
I'm a guy or a girl. And I'm not a girl, but maybe now
Yeah.
I'm just like an individual or this like I mean all the words that you also said, but like let's just like use it like so I'm an individual and you're saying that everyone is an individual
Right.
and not so much man or woman these days.
Right. You're a
This is
human.
pretty contradictory because like I'm sure a lot of people would be like very much like no, but I'm a guy or I'm a girl. Like, that's what my
Right.
mind's going to right now. So yeah,
Right. And I think as consciousness rises in a person, they are sort of divested of the illusion of mental gender. And that's why, I managed to make everyone angry, because the traditionalists are angry because I say there's no gender. But the the revolutionaries are angry as well, because they think that a man can be a woman and a woman can be a man. They think gender is fluid or whatever. I'm saying no, there's no gender. It's not even fluid. There's no gender. There aren't men that are women and women that are men and all this stuff. There's no gender anywhere. It's a construct. You're a human being who has a certain body, and you might have a certain temperament, and you might have certain combination of masculine and feminine energies, whatever, but you don't have a gender. And even if you're naturally more masculine than feminine, you'll find that during the day, during the week, during different situations, your polarities change. There are times where you become feminine if you are predominantly masculine, and there are times where you become masculine if you are predominantly feminine. It's always changing and converging, and that's actually what gives it energy, because anything that is regenerative is always changing polarities between two different poles. So if a person is to be energetic and alive and restorative, they must change between masculine and feminine. If they're stuck in either, then they're going to be like a lake that isn't flowing. Something is dead. Something is not moving. So the nature of masculine and feminine energy, according to my observations in myself and others, is that it has some tendencies, but um, it is generally changing and regenerating. And we often see, we see that sort of compensation. There is the old sort of caricature with, you have this hyper masculine boss who is the CEO of whatever, and then he goes and he gets dominated by some woman in his free time because he's been so hyper masculine that now he needs to compensate by getting into his femininity. So he's hyper masculine, and then he goes into being hyper feminine because he otherwise he's out of balance. So his being craves being dominated because he's always dominating. He craves losing control. He craves surrendering because he's always the one with responsibility. He's always the one who has to do everything, right? So so I think that the modern conscious person of today is in a balance of masculine and feminine, with a little bit of a tendency towards one or the other. I think everyone has a primary element, but if they're a healthy person, I don't think it's much more than, like, let's say, a 60-40 or something, 70-30. Because if they're too heavily skewed towards one polarity, then suddenly they start to have negative traits that create problems for them. Like, for example, oh, I'm too feminine. Uh, I'm going to be resigned instead of fixing my problems. Or I'm too masculine. All I'm going to do is run my company and I don't really feel anything. So I don't believe in men and women, and I don't believe in two partners who each have an extreme masculine and extreme feminine, and then they come together and they balance each other out. And then when the partner is not available, you're just lost because you can't.
completely
I
gone.
mean, that's what we did in the 50s, right? Now, that's what we did in the 50s. Like, we were extremely polarized, and then the two genders just couldn't live without each other because we were so specialized. The man did everything action wise, the woman did everything, you know, house wise. And so I don't think gender exists anymore. And I think a healthy person is in balance, because I don't think you can live in society and not have the competencies that both masculine and feminine traits require. Like imagine a guy who couldn't take care of, like for example, you have a child. Imagine if you just couldn't take care of the baby because you just refused the feminine side of like nurturing and let's call it mothering or fathering, whatever, right?
Yeah,
Your wife would have
just
to
get
always
crazy.
take care of that. That would be a huge problem for you, because what when she doesn't have time, right?
Yeah, well,
So
that is a problem. She doesn't have the
yeah.
time, and so there is
Well,
that.
it's not a problem, because you also are, I mean, you're a person who I consider to be very much in balance. So you're a very nurturing person as well, right?
Yeah, well, I do make an effort with that, especially being a father, well, being a
Right.
parent, right? And in in today's age, or just in any, like, that's always something like an ideal of mine, I guess. That
Right.
when I was a father, and now I am actually, that that I would be there. Like, that work wouldn't be the only thing. That I would be there for her in a, yeah, in a way where I could, not just in a practical way, but also, like you said, in a nurturing way, or in a caring way, or in like that kind of, in the motherly way, you could say, or like the classic motherly kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like so much has changed, and yet, you know at the same time, like, it's 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 largely like what we see in our environment, in within masculine and feminine. Because I just
Right.
say, personally, growing up in Australia, um, and in the workplaces that I've been in and things like that, it really depends on the leader to what kind of, like, the leader can be, yeah, a boss, but leader can also be like a parent, or it can be a teacher, or it's like these role models that we have in our lives, that really can shape the norm, or shape like what's like what they're doing, I guess you could say. Um, and where I'm going with this is, like, I've had some leaders that have been extremely, like, on the spectrum of, like, 50s, 60s masculine, like, super
Yeah.
hierarchical kind of, like,
Hyper masculine.
yeah, and just like do this thing, like, kind of just like, uh, yeah, pretty much just very domineering, right? And then I've
Yeah.
also had leaders that are, like, on the other end of the spectrum, that are very, very feminine, and very much like, um, very, like, yeah, soft and nurturing, and kind of emotional, and very kind of like,
And that
just
causes problems too, interestingly.
huge problems,
Yeah.
because there's the masculine part that's missing, with like the active,
Right.
the practical, the get shit done, basically. But
Yeah, and fearing conflict, right? Because that's a negative feminine trait,
that
is fearing
a,
conflict.
a huge one, and that's in these two different leaders.
Yeah.
These are in workplaces, I would just openly say, right? These two different leaders that definitely shine very, like, clearly, is like, one, the masculine was very, like, happy for conflict, like, kind of like, let's
Right.
get it sorted, let's be a man about it, or let's be the masculine about it, and kind of get it on the table, and get a fix, or whatever. And then the
Yeah.
feminine's just like, no, conflict, that's like, that's too emotional, too much to kind of. And so that there definitely would cause a lot of problems with that. um and at the same time, it's like, there's so much to learn from that as well. And this, like, this thing of what we're talking about now, this balancing between the both. It doesn't have to be one
Yeah.
end of the spectrum or the other, but in today's world, it can
Not at
be,
all. Not at all.
both, and we can choose that, and we can notice that, and we can kind of check in, or kind of, like, I guess, like, understand when we are out of balance. And so, what I want to ask you with
Right.
that is, like, what are some of the things that you notice, within yourself, or within other people, maybe clients you have, or when people are out of balance? How do you kind of identify that? Um, yeah,
Well, I mean, being out of balance is always easy to identify, because if someone has a problem, then usually something's out of balance, right? And if the
Straight up.
problem keeps popping up, and if the problem keeps popping up, well, then they're probably having the same problem. They're probably out of the same balance. And I think, and one thing you said, which I think is interesting, is I think you could create a therapy that is only based on the paradigm of masculine and feminine imbalances and balancing that. I think we can look at personal growth only through that paradigm, and we won't specifically be missing anything. Like I
Okay.
don't personally do it.
Okay. So if you were to do it, to then,
Right,
and you say you don't personally do it, but I reckon you
right.
do some things with this, right? Like at least in the time we've been together, I've experienced like how you are with me, and you can be very direct sometimes. I actually do remember like the first time we met, and you just like I don't know if this is masculine energy or whatever, but like you just like I can't contact you, or like you just you're in your
I,
head about like whatever it's going on. Like, can you
I
just
said I couldn't feel you.
you couldn't feel me, yeah, and that's an emotional, no, like emotional. That's a clear feminine energy, because you know
Right,
to feel something is to be, you know, to be able to like to be able to feel, right. You got to like kind of be in your body and be very much in this feminine energy,
right.
and able to listen to that. And so um
But interestingly, calling it out like I did is a masculine trait. So
yes, yes,
that's a it's a good example of balance.
of a both, yeah. um where was I going with that? Yeah, that even doing that, right, calling that out was enough for me to be like, whoa, like a bit of like a shock, I guess, and just like, okay, I noticed that I'm in my mind, or I'm kind of putting on a mask or putting on like some kind of front,
Yeah,
and that can be, we can do that in like, and in so many different situations in the workplace, in with friends, with like when we're meeting people for the first time, like, like yourself, like in all kinds of things that we put on this mask of like, yeah, I don't know if it's masculine or feminine, but we just put on that, and then it's hard to like meet the person, or meet like to feel them, or to kind of sense them, and to connect with that person. So
yeah.
how would, but getting back to the question, okay, so if you were to do therapy from a masculine feminine place, how would you go about that? What would you kind of,
Well, I would. I mean, I would use my intuition to read it, which for me is natural. But if I didn't have my intuition, I would be talking to the person and asking them about their lives, and then I would try to find out where is the imbalance, right? And if you have this guy and he's like, I just my life is pretty good. I have my my work is working, everything's working out, but I just want a girlfriend. I really want a partner, whatever. And then I'd be like, do you want a girlfriend? Do you want to be loved or whatever? Or do you actually want to love yourself and meet yourself and actually have time and space where you come and meet yourself? Which do you actually want? Because if you get a girlfriend because your feminine side is underdeveloped, then whenever she's not available, you're going to feel in pain because you're missing that. And then you're going to have some kind of dysfunctional way of dealing with the fact that the object of your addiction is missing or unavailable. And that's going to turn into a fight or being distant or cheating or whatever it is. So, whatever it is we look for in relationships, when we feel a need, a, a compulsion to have something, it actually shows us which of our energies are out of balance. And that is not fixed through a relationship, because a relationship will only provide it some of the time and some of what we need. But it's not, it's going to be intermittent. It's not going to be all the time. It's not going to be available. And then we're going to fight with the person because they have what we think we need. So So what I would do is whatever problem they came to me with, I would look at it through the perspective of, is there is there any are there any positive masculine traits that are missing here? Are there any positive feminine traits that are missing here? Are there any negative masculine traits at play? Are there any negative feminine traits at play? And then I would try to balance them by talking with them through that paradigm. I rarely I rarely use this metaphor because it's kind of a loaded one, and it requires that the person is that it makes sense to the person.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that you could structure any therapy through this prism, because it's anything comes down to having an underdeveloped feminine or masculine side. I mean, even spirituality to a great degree is feminine energy. At least the the kind of spirituality I would recommend is feminine, because that's the easy spirituality. The hard spirituality is masculine, and that's very difficult. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone.
Now I'm intrigued. But I want to first say, like, okay, so what you were saying about relationships, right? Like,
Right.
what I heard in that was like that that people, and I'll just say myself included, at certain times in like
Everyone.
in
Everyone.
different relationships, everyone, um, that what we don't have. So if we don't have, for example, if I don't have some feminine energy or masculine energy, then I go and like seek that in somebody else, in another person,
Right. Right.
and and then get a fix, you could say, or get like a like get the balance. But then when that person
Right.
is not there anymore, or for example, just like not available in that way, you could say as well, then I'm all of a sudden like don't have that, so I'm not whole, you could say. Well, maybe not whole, but like
Exactly.
yeah,
That's really well said. Then
yeah,
you feel that something is missing.
yeah. And it's like to ask that of the other person in the relationship is also like, well, it can be quite demanding, right? And it's like it actually, what I've experienced, it can kind of suck the kind of, yeah, it can just be can lead to a lot of problems. Let's just say that.
Yeah, yeah. I've had
Yeah,
all my problems
yeah,
have been based on that,
yeah.
and of course, I'm not saying, of course, good relationships, you cover for each other, you give each other what you need, and all this stuff. That's natural. But here I'm talking about an extreme lack of something in yourself leads to unhealthiness. I'm not
Mm.
saying relationships shouldn't be based on also fulfilling each other's needs and wants. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you fundamentally lack something, then that's going to be a problem in your relationship. And finding a partner that has that is not going to fix it, because
And so,
incidentally, usually, the person is also unbalanced um, in the opposite way. So they also have a problem.
so you're saying what will kind of bring a balance to that, or like a long term fix, you could say, not just like a short term
Right.
thing, is this with actually looking for that within yourself, or like kind of becoming whole, like doing the work on yourself
Right.
to kind of get in balance, or kind of it seems very simple when you say it like that, but there is work to be done before you kind of even realize some
Right.
of this stuff of that you are whole and you don't need the other person to rely on that for that masculine or feminine part of you, because you have that in yourself. We all have that actually. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
just very very buried because of the way we're being brought up, or the way um, the society, or like the our surroundings, or what we believe in ourselves, or all these kind of things can like hold us back from like getting in touch with that part of us, whether that's the feminine or the masculine.
as a conscious person today, this is work you have to do on your own because the world hasn't figured it out yet, and it doesn't understand it yet. But I would say that a conscious person today really has to work on ba- balancing their energies, and a good relationship. And I hope I don't piss too many people off here. But a good relationship does not come. It does not come from two people who feel like they need each other or lack each other. A good relationship comes from two people who are pretty happy on their own, alone, but who, when they find this person, they find that together their energies are even better together. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have high and lows. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to cover for each other through life. It doesn't mean that they aren't going to be masculine and feminine, um, compensating for each other at times. That's not what it means. That's all natural. But a good relationship is based on a positive, upward going energy that synergizes together and empowers each other. It is not based on needs, because when you go, and I'm sorry for the people that this hits, but when you go to someone else to fulfill your need, what you want is your needs fulfilled. It's not the other person. And that's also why I often advertise people, or I advise people, that if you only think of someone when you want something or need something, don't enter into a partnership with them, because you don't want them, you want your needs filled. And those relationships always turns into these relationships where, when you've been together for a little while, you feel something is missing, you want more. Why do you want more? That's because you got your needs filled, and now you find out that your energies are not synergistic, they're not bringing you up. It's not, this is not a spiritual relationship, you just wanted your needs met. And that's why it's so important to take care of your own needs, because if you don't, you'll end up somewhere, you'll end up in something which you, as soon as you get your needs full, you want to get out of it again. And it's not so easy to get out of these things again once you're in them.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
Says the married man.
Says the married. But that's pretty powerful stuff. With like, yeah, it's going to be interesting
with
to
my
hear
with
what.
many failed relationships, I have so many failed relationships behind me. I can say with my absolute conviction that that is the case, because I have tried doing it the other way around and it did not work out.
Okay, so I'm curious, Tobin. I'm curious. You know, you're talking about like this stuff is like about feminine, masculine energy, the conscious person. It's not like people aren't there yet or whatever. You said something like before.
Right.
I'm just really curious. How do people get there? What can people do? This is a masculine question, right? What can
Right.
people do to get more in balance? What can people do to kind of bring up their like consciousness about masculine, feminine energy, or just get to where like the yeah, just raise that kind of awareness to the next level, you could say.
Right. And I'm gonna turn that question back on you, Jonathan, because as the
Oh
listeners already know
shit.
you a little bit, but the thing is, I experience you as you are very, very much in balance. Sometimes you steer a little bit towards the masculine. You can get caught up in, action and doing, getting things done and all that stuff.
I
But
love
that's sort
action.
of
I'm all about action.
we're all yeah, but we're all, in a negative sort of way, we're all a little bit hooked on getting to the future and getting things done. That's the problem of the times, right? So you have a little bit of that. I have a little bit of that. But you are a very balanced person in terms of femininity and masculinity. You are nurturing, kind, friendly, yet you're honest and truthful. You cut through the noise with your truth now and then, which I something I really admire and respect in you. And you say that you say honest things when they're necessary, even if they can be hard to hear. And that's something I admire. That's a very masculine trait. And you're kind and nice and warm and very patient, more patient than I am, which is also an admirable trait. Much more patient. And you grew up in Australia, which is an extremely masculine culture. So I'm gonna ask you,
Amen.
how does one balance masculine and femininity, especially when one grows up in an environment where there isn't a focus or an acceptance of balance at all? How did you come to be like this?
You know what? To be honest, I just woke up like this one day. That was it.
Wow, wow, easy. There's a
Just
pill
like,
for it. We can sell it.
boom, magic. First of all, I just want to say like that's quite heartfelt, like what you just said now. Um, it's very like kind of yeah. I just want to like take on that compliment. I'm not used to doing that, to taking on compliments. I used to be like, don't like it's
Positive
not.
feminine trait. Take in
Yeah,
love when it comes, right?
taking love. Yeah. Um, and I also want to say I also see a lot of those things in you. And you once said to me that you can only recognize something in somebody else if you yourself has experienced that or is experiencing that. So I could say
True.
like there is a lot of things I notice in you, especially this with like the now I'm just turning the I will answer the question.
You're avoiding the question. But
Yeah.
I
Okay.
appreciate the sentiment.
Uh, how have I balanced that? You know, to be honest, like um,
How have you balanced it, and how should people balance it going forward?
first of all, it hasn't been easy, and secondly, I've failed a lot of times because I've been too tend to be too much on the masculine, um, and in doing that, just pushed forward. Like no matter what the goal was, no matter what the thing in the future was, that was the outcome, and I would just get there no matter what.
Right.
And in doing that, like I I I think I just years later realized, well, years later now realized that I just I missed out on so much, on so many, yeah, like friendships or relationships or connections, or just like also just that feminine part of me had been yearning for a long time. And when I and so it's been back and forth, right? And to be honest, like more recently, what's helped me balance that out is honestly just being really honest, like honest with myself when I and like um honest and like pretty clear on like, okay, there is something missing right now. There is a lot of problems going on, and sometimes I don't need to fix them all the time, but sometimes I just need to like kind of come back to or connect back into me and connect back into this kind of, yeah, this feminine or this emotional or this kind of um, softer part of me, which sometimes gets neglected, right? So it's
Right.
yeah, and like as I'm saying this, what's coming up is actually just like by showing up in that way. So one, like, okay, acknowledging when something is missing. So note, like being aware of that or noticing that there is something going on. There is a problem here. What is it?
Right.
And like, okay, is it this masculine feminine thing? It could be a number of things, but just like noticing and recognizing that, and by doing so, also becoming aware of like when I am acting in that behavior, maybe because it's just like something I'm used to or whatever, and then like becoming aware of that to then notice when I'm in it to be able to do something different, which oftentimes is like just like getting back in touch with my like the softer part of me and not needing to just push forward all the time with something and
Right.
just kind of like yeah. So So just basically showing up, doing the work, and changing that behavior, or changing that thing. So yeah,
And sometimes doing the work means, stopping. Just
yeah,
stop in your tracks and
yeah,
breathe, right?
yeah, yeah.
So I think you're saying something very key here, which I think is so important for a conscious person, is you're saying acknowledge that something is missing. And it's such a like something I talk about a lot with my clients and friends when they want help is like be honest with yourself. Be honest with what's missing. Be honest with where you're failing your own standards, where you're not following your values. Because if you don't know why you're happy, that's because there's something in you you're not listening to. You're not listening to your inner voice. So, listen, acknowledge if something is missing. That's the first path, the first step in getting better is always acknowledging that something is not great.
Can I just say something for a
That's
sec? Like, can I just
right.
say something here, right? Because this is what, like, me personally, and a lot of clients who come and see me have this same problem or issue, right? Is that there is something inside us when we, and it often is much clearer to see when we are like just kind of more sensitive, more softer, more kind of, you could say, in the feminine part of us, right? It's like we
Right.
know, we know what there is something missing. We know that there's that thing there, but we're afraid to kind of, we can be afraid, or like I notice other people can be afraid to kind of take the action, and that's the masculine thing, to like do something about
Right.
the thing that is like the issue, or the thing that is, but actually deeper down, we, that inner voice or that inner part of us already knows. And that's the
Right.
amazing thing, is like that we, like when we're able to be in this feminine part, is sensitive part, we can kind of get in connection with that, and you do that really beautifully, actually, Tobin. You're I would say like
Thank
you're
you.
very, very skillful with that, very, very sensitive in like like picking up, or the like, yeah. Anyway, so that was what I wanted to say. Yeah,
They finally proved, I've been saying this for a long time, they finally proved that emotional intelligence, which is what they call the ability to read other people these days, comes from self observation. Harvard made a study where they linked emotional intelligence with knowing yourself. So if you want to be able to read other people and be more sensitive to what other people are feeling, thinking, doing, all you need to do is just understand yourself better, observe yourself, and then your emotional intelligence will grow. And I thought that was pretty amazing because I never thought science would make that observation, but here we go.
the link,
So yeah. So if you
powerful.
study yourself, you will be able to understand others, and that's uh that's a very feminine, that's a positive feminine trait, because the more you understand others, the more empathetic you also become, because then you see yourself in others, you see them doing the same things you do, feeling the same thing you
Mm,
feel, and thinking the same things you think, and that makes you instantly feel that you're not separated and you're not alien, and then you want to treat others better without ever trying to learn to be a good person or anything. You just instantly recognize the other as self, and that's true empathy and love, in my opinion.
I love it. I love it. It's like it's just it's, like it true that what you said right now, like it, that is truly about what it means to be seen. What it means to be really, really seen, and and and
Right.
and you do that with me and with other people, and I think that is a gift that you've cultivated, you could say. So it's not just a gift you've been given. You've done the work on yourself, that you know yourself so
Yeah.
well that you can kind of like really like clearer and more able to kind of use that gift with other people, to see others and sometimes see things that they can't see yet, and then therefore like kind of, yeah, give that to them. So that's powerful stuff, and that's something, yeah, it's just like when you're doing therapy, or when you're just in communication with anyone, that's just like a beautiful thing to be able to do, and to be able
Yeah,
to kind of bring into that. That just
but you can
creates such
only
a strong connection. So it's like, yeah, yeah,
you can only see people as deeply as they'll allow you. So I think that's another a big thing on the conscious, authentic path is let people in, let them see you, because otherwise you won't feel seen, and that's actually what everyone just wants. I don't think there's anything particular else going on. People just want other people that see them, recognize them for their enormous, infinite being and potential and qualities. And that's what you and I do together, which is why the relationship is also so giving, because we can see each other much more than most people we meet can.
I gotta be honest here. You keep saying that, right? And I'm not quite there, but I know I'm there, but it's like I gotta just like trust in like in that, and that's a
Right,
and that I would say that's not just a me thing. That's like a general thing. Is like this trust in ourself when there is that
right,
going on, like with, and also the trust in like it's okay to be feminine. It's okay to be masculine.
yeah,
Both are very much a part of being a human being, part of showing up, and and we need both to be able to. And when we are in balance, it's much like it's just, you can feel that, right? You can feel that in your life. You can feel that in your connection with other people. You can feel that in so many different things, and that's the beautiful thing about like this, what we're talking about now, and sharing that with you, and just like this conscious path is like it's available to us all. We just need to do the work on ourselves, or maybe need help, like need some help doing the work on ourselves, you could say. Not all the time, but like, you know what I mean? And so, but it is always there. It is always deep down in us. We just need to kind of trust in ourselves, me included,
yeah.
right now. Like, and that's a beautiful thing about this stuff.
And
Yeah,
there's so many men and women out there who feel that something is missing in their lives. I went for so many years. I felt like something central is missing in my life. For many men, life feels sort of juiceless and lifeless, and it feels without warmth and life and kindness. Because if you don't have the feminine side, life is pretty crap.
man,
It's like a walking in a desert with no water for decades.
I get you. I literally like quit my job at some point, like in my career and stuff, and just traveled the world for 2 years because of this.
Yeah,
Something was missing, and I wasn't clear on what on earth it was.
yeah.
And these conversations make it much more clear what it actually was. And yeah, we go to great extents to kind of like get the thing that's missing when it's always,
Yeah.
and like when it's all along, it's within us. We just need to
It
awaken
sounds like
that.
a cliche. It sounds like pie in the sky, but really everything you need is actually inside you. The world is full of wonderful things that you can experience as well. But the main course, the primary nourishment is always within. The rest is just kind of dessert. And whenever it becomes more than dessert, you start suffering, because then what you need is outside of yourself, and then you have no control. And then you have to chase it and get lucky and steal it from other people, and then you have that's where the ego arises, that's where scarcity arises, that's where war arises, because then suddenly you need to satiate your desires, and to do that you need resources, and that's the same resources that other people with other desires are chasing after, and then you have conflict. So really The conscious path to happiness is also the solution to wars, to the climate problems, and all these things, because they all happen because there's always conflict whenever anyone does not decide to find happiness in themselves. Then conflict is the inevitable result. It cannot be avoided.
I've got so much to learn about this.
Well, I think you're already living it. So, but I'm just talking it right now.
Yeah. And to be truthful, we're all living that from time to time. It's just like becoming conscious of that, and
Right.
actually choosing that, and like kind of continuously showing up and um, doing the work. This
There's a
beautiful
whole
work.
the feminine and masculine discussion has a whole topic concerning sex and sexuality,
Oh shit.
and we do not have time to go into it. But I have many stories, not explicit stories, but I have many stories about that and how I came to discover that I had totally misunderstood my own sexuality because of societal norms. But unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. So that'll have to be another time.
Torben, how could you drop such a juicy thing right at the end of the podcast? But I love it.
but I, I but
Um,
I'll
the
but I'll say
cliffhanger.
this: if as a woman, as a woman, if as a woman or a man, you feel that something is missing in your sex life, it is likely that you are thinking that your polarity is different than it is. You might be acting feminine when you should be acting masculine, or in the reverse. And that's because while we should balance everything, and while even sexuality is a convergence and change of energies, we do almost always have a primary element. And that's the one that you do have to live from a little more. And especially in sexuality, you must act out your primary element, because that is the element where you get energy from. Whereas the element which is not your primary element is an element you'll lose energy. And even if it's fun sometimes, it does not restore you. And so there's a lot of men and a lot of women who feel that sex is missing something very vital and essential, and think that they just don't think there's that much to the hype. But the hype is real. You're just doing it wrong. And I think that's probably it for today for me.
So we're gonna leave on a very juicy topic. I love how you just threw that in at the end. That's amazing. Uh,
I was wanting to talk about it for a while, but we ended up talking about other interesting stuff. So unfortunately, the time came away from us.
and we got a little bit in at the end. So, but we really want to
Just a
just
little bit.
we really want to say for you who is listening right now, we're just super happy that you're part of this conscious journey, that you're actually listened right to the end. That's absolutely amazing. And
Yeah.
I do feel from my heart like a deep gratitude for doing this and sharing this with you. And it means so much that you're a part of this. And so thank you for being on this journey together and tuning in to us.
We love that you guys are listening, and we'll build up more community around it. We want to hear your opinions. We want you to talk to each other, find other conscious people. We want to connect more conscious people, because there's so many like us out there, but so few of us are finding each other and talking to each other because we're so spread out.
Man,
So
I'm so happy we're doing this together and that we've created this thing. This is amazing.
yeah, yeah,
All right, let's finish on that note. It's getting late.
right.
Thank you, everyone,
Yep.
and
So
that's
that was the first
that's a wrap.
podcast. That was the first podcast about feminine and masculine energy for the conscious person today.